Hello Year 10 and welcome to another amazing lockdown lesson in English. So we are carrying on from last time, which was the woman in black, and today's plan is as follows on the left hand side of the screen. So we're going to do a quick paper 1 review, so a little quiz recapping on what paper 1 actually is for the first few questions. Then a question 2 self-assessment based on the work you did yesterday. Then we'll start looking at question 3. So what is question 3? Then we're going to reread through The Woman in Black, and I'm going to talk you through how I would plan a question 3 response. Your task for today is going to be planning your question 3 really well. Obviously, we're not needing to do anything like this in exam conditions. We have the luxury of time now, so let's focus on making sure that this really counts. Okay, so paper 1 review. And this is just quick fire questions. You can either do it in your head or you can jot it down if you think it's going to be helpful, but you'll have this stuff written down in your exercise book somewhere. So firstly, what is question 1? We did it yesterday, so you should remember. What skills does it require? How many marks is it worth? What's question 2? What skills does it require? How many marks is it worth? How much time should you spend on it? And finally, 5 language features you could discuss for question 2. So if you're going to play along and humour me, pause the video now, write down or think about your answers, and then come back for my explanations. Okay, question 1, name 4 things. Skills, inference and retrieval. You are literally picking out information. Question 3, it's worth 4 marks. Question 2 is about language. The skills required are analysis. It's worth 8 marks. You should probably spend about 10 minutes on it. And finally, any language features will do. So simile, metaphor, alliteration, oxymoron, emotive language, even if you just had to say powerful verb. So any of those features would do. So let's go over our question 2 responses from yesterday. What I would like you to do in a different coloured pen, doesn't have to be green, is to give yourself a self-assessment. So what went well? Where could you improve? So what I'm going to do is kind of take you through the process of self-assessment. This is what the exam board would be thinking when they're looking at your responses. So firstly, did you actually answer the question and refer to the atmosphere that's created? Did you embed your quote? Did you analyse the devices in the quote? Remember, it's asking you about subject terminology as well. Did you zoom into key words? So that really close analysis. What's the connotation of that particular word? Why might the writer have done that? Did you consider an alternative interpretation of your quote? What else could it suggest? What more could we infer? And finally, did you manage to make a range of points, i.e. 2 detailed paragraphs? So using that as a guide, give yourself a what went well and even better if. Pause it now, this should take you a few minutes. Okay, here's one I made earlier. So this is an example question 2, and as always, I would like you to think about what's good about it, and you love slating my work, so where you think it could be improved. In the extract, the writer uses detailed imagery of Arthur's behaviour and thoughts to create an ominous and terrifying environment. The writer uses dynamic verbs and switches to the character's inner consciousness. For example, I sat up paralysed, frozen in the bed, conscious only of the dog and of the prickling of my own skin. The use of powerful verbs paralysed and frozen immediately connote to the Gothic genre and place this intense atmosphere, heightening the reader's sense of anxiety for Arthur. We're then presented with Arthur's prickling skin, imagery commonly associated with extreme fear, further developing the ominous atmosphere Arthur is in. So, just a little moment of reflection. Where do you think that would hit the marks? And how could it be improved? So just pause it here, think about it for a couple of minutes. You needn't write anything down if you don't want to. Okay, so what I would like you to do, you have got your own question 2, you've self-assessed it, you have looked at an example, so now it's time to refamiliarise ourselves with the mark scheme. So the key words for the highest band, perceptive and detailed. Then level 3, clear and relevant. Level 2, some understanding and comment. And level 1, simple and limited. What I would like you to do is using the mark scheme. Give yourself a mark out of 8. Be fair to yourselves, because I know you can be very critical. So be fair, genuinely, what do you think you would achieve given the work you did yesterday? Just take a few minutes to go over it. Okay, question 3, below your mind, because yes, we need to think about the whole of the source, but it's actually from the middle of a novella. This is news for all of us. So, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? And you should write about the beginning, how the source develops, what we focus on, and any other structural features. What I would do is I would just write down that main question in the middle. So how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? Because in your books, you can keep nice little neat subheadings, or if you're typing, wherever. Do that now, and then come back. Okay, so I've kind of put a summary of how to approach it on the slide here. So there's key vocab on the right, and then a series of questions you could use to work your way through the extract. Now, if you're fairly confident, you might just want to pause the video now and work through those questions or skim them and see if it'll inform your understanding. If you're feeling a bit rocky about question 3, what I'm going to do is reread it with you, and I'll kind of think about what I might point out as I go, so I'll kind of verbalise what I'm thinking. Okay, so up to you. You can either skip the next bit if you're confident, or stay with the video if you'd like to be guided through how to approach at question 3. Okay, rereading the extract. I'm going to skip the italics because we don't need it for the structure question, we've already read it. So the 3 things I'm going to be thinking about is what's the writer focusing my attention on at the beginning, how is that being developed, and what structural feature is being used at this point. At first, all seemed very quiet, very still, and I wondered why I'd woken. Then with a missed heartbeat, I realised that Spider was up and standing at the door. Every hair of her body was on end, her ears were pricked, her tail erect, and whole of her tense as if ready to spring, and she was emitting a soft, low growl from deep in her throat. I sat up paralysed, frozen in bed, conscious only of the dog and the prickling of my own skin, and of what suddenly seemed a different kind of silence, ominous and dreadful. And then, from somewhere within the depths of the house, but somewhere not very far from the room in which I was, I heard a noise. It was a faint noise, and strain my ears as I might, I could not make out exactly what it was. It was a sound like a regular yet intermittent bump or rumble. Nothing else happened. There were no footsteps, no creaking floorboards. The air was absolutely still. The wind did not moan through the casement. Only the muffled noise went on, and the dog continued to stand, bristling at the door, now putting her nose to the gap at the bottom and snuffling along, now taking a pace backwards, head cocked, and like me, listening, and every so often, she growled again. Okay, so some of the things that I might talk about is the focus is obviously the protagonist waking, and it's this eerie, ominous silence apart from this one noise, and the dog is clearly freaked out by it. So I'd say there's kind of a motif of silence or a motif of sound, if you will. I talk about the focus on the dog and the faint noise, and maybe this kind of array of noises, and it unnerves us as a reader because we're not sure what the protagonist is listening to either. So it creates this incredibly tense atmosphere because we don't quite know what's going on. I'm going to carry on. So what I'm thinking about this time. So what main points of focus does the writer develop in the sequence after the starting point? How is it being developed? Why is the writer structuring it this way? And how is this specific to helping me relate to the intended meaning at this point in the text? In the end, I suppose, because nothing else happened and because I did have the dog to take with me, I managed to get out of bed, though I was shaken and my heart beat uncomfortably fast within me. But it took some time for me to find sufficient reserves of courage to enable me to open the bedroom door and stand out in the dark corridor. The moment I did so, Spider shot ahead, and I heard her padding about, sniffing intently at every closed door, still growling and grumbling down in her throat. So the focus is the corridor, so the protagonist has got out of bed, out of the bedroom, into the corridor. After a while I heard the sound again. It seemed to be coming from along the passage to my left at the very far end, but it was still quite impossible to identify. Very cautiously, listening, hardly breathing, I ventured a few steps in that direction. Spider went ahead of me. The passage led only to 3 other bedrooms on either side. and one by one, regaining my nerve as I went. I opened them and looked inside each one. Nothing. Only heavy old furniture and empty unmade beds, and in the rooms at the back of a house, moonlight. Down below me on the ground floor of a house, silence, a seething, blanketing, almost tangible silence, and a musty darkness, thick as felt. So here we've got him travelling down the corridor, and I think it's really effective the way that the writer takes us as a reader on the journey with the protagonist. It makes us feel the tension all the more potently. And then I reached the door at the very end of the passage, so the focus is now a door. So we've had kind of bed, corridor, door. So we've been on this journey. Spider was there before me, and her body, as she sniffed beneath it, went rigid. Her growling grew louder. I put my hand on her collar, stroked the rough short hair as much for my own reassurance as for hers. I could feel the tension in her limbs and body as it answered to my own. And I think another really effective feature is juxtaposition's not quite the right word, but this almost contrast between the protagonist who's trying to be very rational and logical and the dog that's clearly animalistic. It's relying on its senses. And I think that kind of conflict in response is effective structurally as well. So what does the writer focus my attention on at the end of the text? How am I left feeling at the end? And why? Why has the writer done this? Always why. This was the door without the keyhole, which I'd been unable to open on my first visit to Ilmarsh House. So, slight bit of analepsis doesn't really count, it's just a brief reference, but it shows that it's stuck in his mind. I had no idea what was beyond it, except for sound. It was coming from within that room, not very loud, but just a hand on the other side of that single wooden partition. It was the sound of something bumping gently on the floor in a rhythmic sort of way, a familiar sound, and yet one I could still not exactly place. A sound that seemed to belong to my past, to waken old half-forgotten memories and associations deep within me. A sound that in any other place would not have made me afraid, but would, I thought, have been curiously comforting and friendly. And again, this kind of conflict with the protagonist trying to rationalise, trying to play things down, and how sinister and terrifying he's finding the noise is again really effective, for me anyway. But at my feet, the dog Spider began to whine, a thin, pitiful, frightened moan, and to back away from the door a little and press against my legs. My throat felt constricted and dry, and I had begun to shiver. There was something in that room, and I couldn't get to it, nor would I dare to, if I were able. I told myself it was a rat or a trapped bird fallen down the chimney into the hearth and unable to get out again. But the sound was not that of some small panic-stricken creature. Bump, bump, pause. Bump, bump, pause. Bump, 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 bump. Okay, so I really like the way at the end of this extract, we've kind of been taken on this journey, and then the final part is kind of the noise on one side of the door, the protagonist and the dog on the other, and just this kind of door, this separation between them. And the fact that he's getting closer to the noise, the dog's getting more panicked, is really effective in increasing the tension. So, I've kind of verbalised what I've been thinking as I've gone through, and what I would do now is summarise kind of overall, holistically, which structural features I think are most appealing, because I've spoken about it paragraph by paragraph, but I haven't necessarily looked at the overall picture. So I'm going to put my annotations up, but the shift of focus between the character of the dog and the noise, the different reactions, the increase of tension, and another thing that I forgot to mention is the pace. And the pace of this is almost painfully slow. Often when a character's panicking, the writer kind of speeds up the pace of the writing to reflect the breathlessness. But this is so slow, and that really increases our sense of tension and our sense of fear. Okay, so that's kind of what I might talk about. I don't know if I'm going to ruin it by changing the slide, possibly. Before I do, I would like you to take a moment to reread it, annotate it if you've got a hard copy of it, and think about what sort of features that you could write about. As I said, I'll put my annotations up, but it's really important that you clarify your own thoughts as well, because you might spot something that I haven't. So do that now. Come back when you're ready. Okay, So my annotations are pretty much literally what I said to you as I was going through. The highlighted bits are only for structural features. It's just quotes that I might think to use. I've highlighted every mention of noise or lack of noise, and then other things I've kind of focused. And what your job is going to be today is to come up with a really solid plan for how you might respond to this question. Remember, question 3 is only worth 8 marks, but we often find it quite tricky because we've done language analysis all our lives, we're really familiar with it, whereas structural analysis is relatively new to GCSE. So take your time, think about how you would structure it. Fail-safe is beginning, middle, end, but you might like to look at it slightly differently. There's not going to be anything to be submitted onto Teams today because it's just planning, and I'm going to get you to write it up next lesson. So as always, email me if you run into any trouble, if you need any extra support, contact me via Teams, but I'm here if you need me. Take care.